This week in post, does the order of your photo processing adjustments matter? Hey everyone, I'm Scott Davenport. Welcome to In Post. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to dive straight into today's topic. This stemmed out of an email chat I was having with Alan, longtime friend of the show, and we were talking about this photo here. I did a live edit of this a few weeks back now, and he noticed that one of the first things that I did was went in and played around with Lightroom profiles and experimenting with a few of them before I'd touched any sliders. And so he asked, is that something you normally do, or is that recommended? Is it okay to do that at the end? And it's got us talking about the order in which we make adjustments, and are there any fast rules or reasons you would do things in a particular order. That sounded like a pretty good topic, so let's talk about it. So as I thought about this topic and my workflow and what do I do, what do I think makes sense, what doesn't make sense, I've got two kind of top order guidelines for you. The first one is if you are using a single post-processing program. Let's say you're a pure Lightroom user, a pure On1 user, or a pure Photoshop user, and you do not mix and match. I don't think it matters at all. Push the pixels around in any way that you like, and as long as you're ending up with the image that you want. Whether or not you want to start with color or start with exposure, start with curves, play around with profiles, I don't think it matters. You're watching the end result. You're looking at the image on the screen. So for this one here, I could start with a profile and change that, and then I could add clarity. And for the sake of argument, let's say that I want to make the blues richer and darker. Okay, well, let me undo all that. Undo, back up to the basic panel. I could do things in a different order, right? I could add the clarity first. I could say, I want to think about color right now. Let's get those blues darker and let's get them richer. I'm not quite sure about what's going on here with this profile. Do I want to play around with it? I can try landscape. I can try standard. You get the idea here. I'm going to end up in the same spot, and it's the days of having to worry about only do sharpening at the end, or save contrast first, or get your black point and your white point set straight away. It doesn't really matter for the end result. You might have a workflow that you're comfortable with. If you've watched any of the past videos I've done, you know that I tend to start in the basic panel. I get my endpoints of my histogram set, black point, white point, do my basic contrast, and then kind of go into color and so forth. So there's value in having a rhythm and having an approach to your photos. But I think at the end of it, like for example, this profile thing again, I sometimes forget to check this thing out. It's reasonably new in Lightroom, and so if I overlook it and then I realize, I want to go back and change it, or honestly, recently, I've been forgetting about white balance. I don't know why. I've just been skipping over that for some reason and realizing I got to go back and adjust it. That's okay to do, even though you've adjusted other things when you're in a single program like Lightroom, On1, Photoshop, and so forth. Now, the second top order guideline I have for you, if you are using multiple programs to post-process, and you might not even know that going into your initial editing, but you get to a point you realize, I want to take this somewhere else and do a specialty filter or more treatment in Photoshop or whatever it might be. Get your basics done correctly in wherever your starting point is. If you're starting in Lightroom, if you're starting in On1, if you're starting in Photoshop, I guess you're probably going to stay in Photoshop. But getting your basics done. Let's assume for the moment I had overexposed this in the field. I would not want to send this image out to another program, because as soon as I do, I'm going to lose some things. I'm going to lose some latitude. I'm shooting in RAW, and right now I have the RAW file. As soon as I bake that into some other format, PSD, TIFF, and whatnot, I'm going to lose a little bit of flexibility. When I come back to Lightroom, I'm actually going to lose some of these profiles as well, because those operate on RAW files. But even profiles aside, if I've blown out the highlights and then I send that over to another program, I'm baking in the blown out highlights. I'm going to have a really tough time, if not an impossible feat, to recover those. So when you're in the initial program, you want to get your basics down, just solid. And I would say the exception to that is probably dust spots. Those can get fixed up after the fact. but we'd get our fundamentals dialed in, and I'm rushing this a little bit here for the purpose of the video. But let's say this was we were pretty happy with this, and I know that this is still kind of hot and washed out a little bit, but it's not blown out. I'm not clipping. I could then take this and send it into another program. I've got everything. My histogram is containing all of my data. And then I can move it into other programs and do specialty filters, masking, blending, whatever else you might want to be doing on some other end. So getting your basics down first, I think that's an important thing if you're going to a second program. How you get the basics down? Back to the first guideline. You can adjust the sliders in any order that you want, so long as what you end up with on the screen is reasonable, pleasing enough where you're ready to move on to your next step. So one other thought about using multiple programs is there's nothing wrong with, after round tripping, making additional changes. Now, I tend to do this as what I'll call finishing touches. Like I like split tones. Let's say I've taken this photo out to Photoshop, I've come back into Lightroom, and I want to try something else. I want to give it a different treatment. I'll just add a split tone, something really obvious like this orange crush one. And that's going to change the mood of the photo quite a bit. But there's nothing wrong with that. Just because I've round-tripped it, now I'm working on, say, a PSD or a TIFF file, I can still make additional adjustments. That's completely fine in my book. I do tend to shy away from more drastic changes in exposure or contrast, because chances are, once you've round-tripped, you've gone to a second program, maybe a third, and then come back to your home base. You've probably worked pretty hard to get the contrast and the exposure and things the way that you want them, back to getting your basics correct in your first program. But at the end of the day, it's the final image that we're interested in. And maybe that's the tip of the week, is really focusing on the final image and less about the sequence of events that got you there. That's going to do it for this week's In Post. I hope you've enjoyed it. Alan, thanks very much for the question. This was a good topic. I had fun with it, and hopefully others enjoyed it too. If you've got a photo question, love to hear from you. You can leave comments below the video. If you want to keep it private, you can contact me through my website. And I usually turn a response around in a day or two, so you're not going to have to wait forever to hear back from me. And until next time, my name's Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.